students of Reddit, what was the biggest teacher meltdown you ever witnessed? I had a history teacher in high school who was always stern and serious. Which was great since it gave a reverence to what he was teaching about, and his unpretentious nature meant he spoke about what was important and trusting. One day however his voice broke, and after he cleared his throat it broke again. He stopped talking, put his hands in his pockets, frowned, and took a few breaths. Students, sorry about this lecture. My wife and I just decided to get a divorce. He blankly stared ahead for a second and then walked toward the door, loosening his tie. I need a drink. He exited the door. After a second he poked his head back in. Dot of water. I'm coming back. Don't think I've forgotten about Napoleon. Double quote. Not too much of a meltdown, but he was a pretty manly dude in a nerdy sort of way. I went to school in Germany, and once when we had our history class, the lesson started off really weird. The teacher started dictating to us a math problem, in which you had to calculate what the costs are for treating disabled people and how much the state could save if there weren't any disabled people. Most of us immediately realized that this was one of the propaganda math problems students in the Third Reich had to solve. We were kind of confused, since the Third Reich was not the topic which we were discussing at this moment. Nevertheless, we wrote down the problem and even started calculating, when the teacher suddenly snapped. He began to scream at the whole class with an intensity I have not witnessed before, about how we as the students should have rejected solving a task like that one. How we were educated to question everything, but still obeyed when he gave us a task which discriminated against disabled people. He was as furious that he left the classroom and only returned after half an hour. We spent the rest of the class talking about the dangers that a new movement like the Nazis could arise again in Germany, and how we always need to be aware of that. In high school, they would do trivia questions after the announcements sometimes, and the first teacher who dialed the office with the correct answer would get a prize for the class. My math teacher really wanted to win, and hadn't yet this year. So one fateful morning, the question goes out, and we had the answer. So he called it in, but we were the second caller. In a fit of pseudo rage, he yells "damn it," and kicks this little plastic trash can across the room, where it bonks a kid right in the head. His eyes go wide and he apologizes and asks if the kid is okay, which he is. Everyone got a good laugh afterwards, including the kid who got hit. And later, we would pretend to duck whenever we didn't win the morning trivia contests. My junior year in nursing school we took a nursing psych class. The professor was not a good teacher, to put it lightly. She regularly would talk about her personal life instead of teaching what was outlined on the syllabus. About halfway through the course we had our midterm exam, which was consisted of about 75% of questions of stuff we had not covered in class. I think the highest grade anyone got was 65%. The next class she berated us and told us all we were going to be bad nurses. One of the people in my class wrote a letter to her saying that she spends most of the classes not teaching the material, and it is not justifiable to give us exams if we know more about her personal life than what we are supposed to be taught. Citing the syllabus given to us at the beginning of the semester, all of us in the course signed the letter. Next class she absolutely lost it on us, screaming at us about how disrespectful we are and how we will never amount to nothing. This got the point that the dean of the nursing program heard her from down the hall and had to come remove her from the classroom. Next class we had another professor for the rest of the semester. The dean told us she was on hiatus and said that we brought up our grievances in a respectful manner, and commended us on that. The professor who broke down never came back to teach at the school. We had an art teacher who had one glass eye. A student who had a rep for being an arsehole. From a whole family of arseholes, his sister beat me up in infant school, and wisely decided to stick his head around the door to the art room and yell, in a voice that could shatter glass "OI. Harris, you one-eye jack." This did not go down at all well with Mr. Harris, who terrified most kids. Cue manic Welsh art teacher chasing student over the playing fields with a tent spike. The whole class was looking out the window following the chase. All it needed was yakety sax playing as a soundtrack. 8th grade math teacher. He was well known for his short temper. But this particular day was bad. There was a kid in my class, Justin, that never listened and never did his homework. One day, math teacher just had it with Justin. Grabbed his desk, with him in it, and picked it up and slammed it back down on the ground a few times. After that, he shoved the desk with Justin in it across the room. Justin was fine. Thankfully, math teacher just stormed out. Told my mom, and I guess a few other parents called the school about it too. He was gone for a few weeks and had to take anger management classes. I just went by my old middle school a few weeks ago and he's the assistant principal now. Who would have expected that? In my elementary school, there was this one super obnoxious kid named Lance who was constantly goofing off and all of that. Though in all honesty, he probably had ADHD without a good support system. Most of our teachers were used to dealing with him, but one day we had this substitute named MRS. Blake, who had no idea what to do with him and all of our class. He is mouthing off every other moment and jumping around like crazy when she starts to boil over. And yells at Lance to sit down. Which he does. He then calls her a bitch or something under his breath. And she finished her transformation into a boiling tomato. She yells, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Which blew our little elementary school minds. And then very violently shook his desk. The thing was, Lance had a blood condition that made him bruise very easily and very dramatically. When she shook his desk, he started crying, understandably, because he was getting these massive purple black bruises all over his legs. She was banned from our school after that. Junior year of high school, I decided to take a psychology class. The administration switched a lot of teachers around that year and hired a lot of new ones too. So I didn't know anything about him. As the semester goes on, his behavior starts slipping and the class starts noticing. He begins to lose his patience more and more frequently when the class doesn't respond to a question immediately. His behavior then progressed to him throwing whiteboard markers at students for not paying attention or answering incorrectly. Then one day, about 1 stroke to the way into the semester, he completely loses it. A group of 3 students laughed at something within their own conversation just as class was starting, and our teacher saw and made a comment to the class that if we weren't going to listen, he would make today hell. Some kid spoke up saying he would go to the principal if he did anything to hurt the class, so the teacher began throwing markers, erasers, anything he could find at the student. The student got up to leave for the principal's and the teacher stood up on his desk and screamed at us. He ran to the front of the classroom, where the student who spoke out was, picked up a desk and threw it at the student. Thankfully it didn't hit him, but the teacher ran to the door to prevent anyone from leaving and said if anyone told anything about that day to anyone, he would ruin our lives. Some friends and I told the principal and administration, and I actually had to go into court to testify. Turns out the guy suffers from schizophrenia as well as some degree of PTSD after serving in the military. I don't remember what ended up happening with him. At the time I really didn't care to know. After our class picture, our first year teacher declared new rule. Every day is now class picture day. I want to see smiles from each and every one of you every single day. Double quote. The class let out a collective groan and the teacher said, "Come on. Turn those frowns upside down." Double quote. She kept at us for a good month on the smile policy. Keep in mind, this was during the 90s. The class was divided evenly amongst goths, grunge and gangsters. The only thing we agreed upon were that smiles were for pussies. The meltdown came the day she brought in her karaoke machine and attempted to sing Tim McGraw's "Just to See You Smile." We just sat there stone-faced as usual. Then she tried to ham it up just to get us to laugh. But nothing. We were all too tough to show any humor or heart. And then she broke down and started blubbering. I just wanted a smile. Full stop. Full stop. Is that too much to ask? Double quote. Apparently it was because none of us even had the goddamn common courtesy to offer her a tissue. Next day, she went resting bitch face on our asses, and word on the street is she hasn't cracked a smile in 20 years. Had a sub in 5th grade. I was a really unorganized kid and having to dig through my desk for shit wasn't uncommon. Sub went to collect our homework one by one and I was still digging through pulling a bunch of stuff out when she got to me. She got all towering and told me this was unacceptable. Dumped my desk in front of me and told me I was staying in from recess to organize it. One girl said you can't make him do that and the sub raised her voice and spit out you don't tell me what to do. Brat. I can do whatever I want. Double quote. The whole class revolted and a neighboring teacher came in to see what was up. The sub claimed I was being lippy and this was my punishment. Then the whole class spoke up and informed him of what really happened and we were all let out for recess. Came back and a lunch lady was sitting at the teacher's desk instead. As the kid who was always picked on by everyone. It was nice to see the whole class stand up for me that day. 10th grade was in math class and the teacher was getting frustrated that not everyone was understanding a problem and he made various threats on what he would do if we didn't figure it out. More homework tests etc. I kept asking questions because I legitimately didn't understand and he yelled fucksake and threw an eraser at me. I got up and left. Never ratted him out and next day he was super patient with everyone. It was his, oh I fucked up moment. Reminds me of my math teacher in high school. A sweet old man. Just a few years from retirement but not teacher material. His idea of teaching was that if you didn't understand something he would explain it to you again. With the same words. In the same order. Multiple times. He just could not understand why we had difficulty understanding his explanations. I taught public high school for 7 years and have been teaching in a university ever since. Every time one of these threads pops up, I expect to find the story of how I once broke down in tears when a cell phone rang in class. Or the time I threw up in a trash can. Brushed my teeth with bottled water right in front of all 42 of them. Asked a janitor to come down and take the trash out. And went back to teaching after my favorite student of all time faked barfing noises because he knew it would make me puke. Not so much a breakdown but a break in normal behavior for sure. Our freshman English teacher was a small, soft-spoken woman who was kind of known to be a teacher you could walk all over with little, but not no, repercussions. We were in a review session after school and some upperclassmen were just hanging out in the hallways making lots of noise. So she was constantly poking her head out in the hall asking them to be quiet. As we are all very silent reading or something the classroom door absolutely slammed shut. So hard the latch didn't have time to catch and the door bounced back open. The teacher immediately yells oh hell no. Kicks off her heels and takes off out the door. She caught up with the kid, who had taken a running start and kicked the door shut. And berated him for a good 10 minutes. Which we could hear clear as day from the end of the hall. It was like nothing we'd ever heard from her. This was in high school. We had a band teacher. His nickname was Pinky because he had very red hair and pale skin with a red tint. Borderline albino. Every time he got mad his entire face turned tomato red. I don't remember the sequence of events. But he was already frustrated. Everyone in the room knew to shut up so that we didn't piss him off. Well, everyone except this one dippy girl. She asked something along the lines of are you mad and kept pestering him. He finally snapped. His face turned that familiar shade of tomato red and he threw the pencil he was using to conduct across the room. He then stormed out. And slammed the door hard enough that it could be heard on the other side of the building. He quit soon after. Year 9 maths class. Our teacher was off sick and the early 20s substitute teacher came in to cover. She was lovely. Kind. Friendly. Although a bit timid and shy. One girl in our class used a fountain pen to flick ink on a skirt she was wearing one day. Poor women noticed her do it. Didn't say a word and just went to her desks, put her head in her hands and sobs. Doesn't move to 10 minutes at least. Eventually a friend of mine goes to get another teacher. The sub was escorted out. Still crying and was seen for the rest of the day just crying in her car. Didn't move for another 4 or so hours. In my senior year my English teacher was assaulted by a serial rapist. She was going to check her mail and he grabbed her. She was tiny. But she fought him off and he ran when someone came to see WTF was going on. She wasn't raped. Thank God. But she definitely had PTSD. This was in '89. So she wouldn't have been diagnosed with anything. I don't know why she decided to tell our class. But she fell apart when she got about halfway through. She wasn't the only one. There were a couple of big old boys in that class who were both star football players. Go to say. Until this I thought they were just another couple of jock meatheads. They were both in tears. She finished her story. I can't say that any of us did anything amazing or actually anything at all. But she didn't ever have to walk to her car alone, and some of the students who lived in the same apartment complex kept an eye on her. They got the bastard who attacked her about a year later. He was a very bad man and nearly killed one of the last women he attacked. Junior year in university. My genetics professor was in the middle of a lecture when authorities took him out of the auditorium, thank goodness, and informed him that his wife, the dean of our college, had been struck and killed by a motor vehicle that morning. He retreated to his office and proceeded to tear the place apart like a tornado had gone through it. He ripped the top of his desk off its frame, pulled down all of his bookcases, books, pages, papers, all sorts of documents and furniture strewn everywhere in pieces. By the time I graduated, he still wasn't the same man as he was before that awful day. I had a computer sciences teacher in grade 10 who was a grader asshole and completely incompetent. A friend and I discovered he had recently lost a fair bit of money in the stock market and consequently had been left by his wife. Incognito mode wasn't a thing back then. We honestly could have been way worse about this. But didn't ever bring up his wife or tell anyone what we had discovered. What we did do though, is have a lengthy and audible conversation about the market every morning. How's the TSX doing this morning? Down another 40 points. Stuff like that. We keep this up for 2 weeks and he eventually snaps and starts screaming in the middle of class. Ended up taking the rest of the year off. I got beaten up by a tiny art teacher guy. I used to be an asshole in class and once called him short or something, and he asked me to see him after class. He told me that he had boxing gloves in his car and said he would like to have a quick go with me in the basement of the school. I laughed at first, but he said he was serious and if I decided not to then I should stop talking shit. I agreed and he got a couple pairs of gloves and beat the shit out of me. Not like bloodied and bruised but completely outclassed. Found out later that he was quite the amateur boxer when younger. Not sure it counts as a meltdown, but I learned a lot from it and it definitely was outside the norm. Oh boy. 7th grade. There was a real troublemaker in my school. He just showed up that year from a much different area. A much bigger school with a very different atmosphere from my school. My school was very small and everyone, for the most part, had respect for the teachers. Perhaps the respect came from it being such a small school and not being able to blend in. I'm not sure. Anyways, this guy was a real troublemaker and liked getting all the good kids involved in his shenanigans. He was always interrupting and ignoring the teachers and generally just trying to stir up as much conflict as possible. Now, since every moment of class was full of his nonsense, I can't recall exactly what set of this particular teacher on this day. But whatever it was, she completely lost it. Started just spewing out swear words. Ripped her glasses off her face. Threw them to the ground. They broke in two. She then flew out of the room and punched a locker and stormed to the office. My experience is impossible to write without crying. No one will read this BC, I'm commenting too late. Senior year of high school. We had a teacher MRS. H. She found out she had cancer and she had months to live. She decided to teach with all of her soul. She taught us so many things about life and love and inspiration, and it got to the point where the administrators banned her from the school BC. She wasn't teaching curriculum and she was too sick. We had a sub and Mrs. H broke into the school weeks later. Locked the door and said she needed to read us a poem before she died. She cried while reading it and I don't remember much because the administrators had security banging the door down. The poem said something about her husband who passed. And however Wednesday they danced. How he would spin her, and she had so much joy in that moment and she didn't realize at the time that was the best moments of her life, and for us to hold on to those moments and to realize them as they happen She died shortly after that. When I was in early high school, the government was busy closing down the smaller schools in an effort to condense their education program. The best teacher I've ever had, an English teacher, wasn't liked by the faculty because he wouldn't follow the boring syllabus but rather made learning fun and engaging by basing his lessons on things we could actually relate to as young adults rather than a book report on Catcher in the Rye. We were kids. We didn't give a shit about Holden Caulfield. We wanted to talk about grunge and The Simpsons. When our school closed, all the teachers were transferred to various other surviving schools. Mostly the good ones. But this English teacher was deliberately transferred to a really shitty school full of gangs and violent kids. Some sort of punishment, I think. He got his car and did donuts on the school oval just before he left on the last day. Shit was tight. In front of the whole faculty and student body. Middle finger as he tore out the gate. He ended up going to the shit school. Last I'd heard, he lost an eye when a student there punched him. I went to an engineering college that doubled as a university. As a psychology major. The program was pretty lax and existed just to provide some alternative liberal arts programs. Intending to increase the reputation and depth of the psych department, the school hired a well-renowned professor who had taught at several high-tier, just under Ivy, schools. Needless to say, he was not happy with the program and proceeded to fail students that would have cruised through the pre-existing program. The school administration was not happy when grades and pass rate in the department started plummeting. So they got on said professors. I should have mentioned he also was hired to head the psych dep just under the dean, case. Refusing to simply pass students or make the program easier, the teacher one day stripped to his underwear in class and told us if we could find him hiding anywhere on campus, we could tell him the grade we thought we deserved and he would change it on the spot. He took a 10-minute head start and my entire senior seminar began a game of campus-wide hide and seek. Eventually we found him. Still mostly nude. At the top of an apple tree. He then made us climb to meet him and we received said grades. He also threw apples at students he didn't recognize. Or who didn't come to class. The best part of all of this is he didn't get fired and the university redid the entire psych program the following semester. I'm a teacher. I watched a fellow instructor, already late to her class, throw a temper tantrum in the office to our academic director. Her issue? Having to take attendance. Yep. She threw her clipboard down on the ground and whined. Not sure why she wasn't let go after that. But our boss put her down hard. She also frequently complained about the lack of basic critical thinking skills in one segment of our student demographics, international students from a certain region. She's right that they can't adhere to Western style critical thinking and logic. But our job is to improve that. Not complain about it. Honestly. A lot of these incidents from instructors happen because of low pay. Since at least a quarter of our work is generally unpaid. Frustration runs high. I was sitting in my government class in high school. The door to the room was open and kids were going by on their way to lunch. My teacher hears one student say, "I would really like to fuck a retarded person because they wouldn't be able to rat me out since they wouldn't know what was going on really." My teacher went ballistic. She jumped into the hallway, grabbed the kid by his shoulder and brought him into the room, shooing the rest of us out into the hallway. She really laid into the kid. Red-faced screaming and wild hand gestures. We couldn't all get out fast enough and the door was still open. She ended up slamming her fist onto the overhead projector, breaking the glass. The kid was wide-eyed and shaking at this point. I don't know what happened after that, but she didn't get fired or anything. When I was in second grade, my teacher's favorite stamp disappeared. She started breaking down in tears thinking that one of us, her students, stole it from her. She said, "I'm going to leave. And that stamp better be there when I come back." She leaves and all of us second graders are just staring at each other wondering what are we gonna do? Well, come to find out it was the girl that sat right next to her desk. She stole her stamp and was just hiding it in her backpack. We made her put it back and our teacher came back and saw it there. She still kept crying. "Fuck you, Nancy. You stamp thief." I had a high school English teacher who had been knocked up while she was in high school. She worked through college and eventually got married to her baby daddy and against all odds had a successful life. At age 25 they were boating with their daughter when the boat capsized and her high school sweetheart husband drowned, saving their daughter's life. Got knocked out by the propeller or something. Anyway, on one of the last weeks of school we were just going to watch a movie and the class voted on Castaway. Most of the class had no idea of the above story at the time. Well, there is the scene where he is floating at sea and Wilson is floating away and he's just screaming and crying, "Wilson, Wilson." She tried holding it together but eventually she completely lost it and just broke down in front of the class and eventually just ran out while bawling with 45 minutes left in class. It was the most sad I have ever seen a person be. It was painful and I can't even imagine how hard that must have been for her. When I was on high school we, friends and I, used to do a chocolate friend on Easter time. We had a teacher that was simply too quiet and repressed. Never speak to anyone out of class. Barely speak to others teachers. The school had a lot of tales about his social condition. Some said he lost all his family in a car accident. Some said he was just too depressed because don't achieve his dream. I never got to know the truth. But I liked him anyway. He was polite. Kind and never done anything unfair or mean to anyone. Even through all the teasing he got from Buddha's students, is that the right term? Plus he is an excellent teacher. So one day we asked him to give us 15 class minutes to change candies and chocolate. He agreed. No problem. So a friend of mine made a start speech. Then give the teacher a box of chocolates. The teacher becomes speechless. Start to shake and cry. We all gave him chocolates, candies and hugs. From that day until we graduated we always talked to him on the hallways of the school and gave him something to sweeten the day and remember that despite our relationship teacher-student we care about him and he was not alone. TLDR, introvert and alone teacher cried when a friend gave him box of chocolates. I have some disabilities and in high school I was bullied for it. One of them causes me to fall if I am startled. Some students decided to make a game of this. The issue was there was never any proof so nothing could be done. One time I overheard some students laughing and got a glimpse of the video they were watching. It was me on the floor. I lost it and punched the person with the phone, Andre, and proceeded to steal it. One of my friends, Devin, found me in the hall and sees the video. He is usually a very gentle giant but he goes into Hulk mode and grabs the kid who took the video and proceeds to threaten to beat him senseless unless he goes with him and myself to the student dean. When we arrive at student dean Andre tries to play it like myself and Devin are the culprits. Our student dean was having none of it. He proceeds to grab Andre by the shirt, threatens him with expulsion unless he tells him what's going on. When Andre comes clean the dean grabs him by the shirt and proceeds to drag him to the principal's office screaming at him and telling him he's an imbecile and the lowest life form for picking on someone for something they can't control. The guy with the video and 4 others who were in it had to write me an apology. Write a 5-page paper on autism and we're given lunch detention for rest of year. This happened in January. TLDR. Assholes get wrecked.